Lila Monroe never imagined the moment she called 911 would begin with rain and end with a billionaire saying her name like a prayer he had been swallowing for years. At 11:43 on a Thursday night, she was barefoot in her kitchen, still wearing faded navy scrubs under an oversized sweatshirt, when movement in the courtyard froze her in place. Across the narrow gap between the old brownstone and the renovated carriage house stood a man beneath the amber spill of a security light. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was simply standing there, one hand in the pocket of a dark coat, staring up at her third-floor window with a stillness so complete it felt deliberate. Lila's pulse lurched. She snapped the kitchen light off and flattened herself against the wall, heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. Lila kept her voice low and tight. "My neighbor is outside again. I think he's been watching me." The woman on the line asked for a description. Tall. Dark hair. Broad shoulders. Late 30s, maybe. Always alone. Always outside when she left for her dawn shifts at the hospital, or returned after midnight, or checked her mail on the first floor. At first she had told herself it was nothing. New neighborhood, too little sleep, too many horror stories passed between nurses during overnight breaks. But then there had been the white roses left outside her apartment door 3 mornings ago. And the note tucked beneath the ribbon. No signature. Just one line written in clean black ink. "You deserve a life that doesn't hurt this much." She had almost thrown them away, but something about the neatness of the handwriting unsettled her more than if the note had been crude. Crude men were easy to identify. Careful men were harder. The police said a car was on the way. Lila stayed crouched beside her couch, peering through a slit in the curtain. The man never moved. Rain glazed his coat and sharpened the line of his shoulders. The longer he stood there, the stranger it felt. Most men who wanted to intimidate looked obvious about it. This one looked like he was waiting for a verdict. 2 patrol cars rolled up 3 minutes later, blue lights washing the brick walls in pulses. Relief rushed through her so hard it left her shaky. One officer entered the courtyard and called out. The man turned slowly, unhurried, as if he had expected interruption. The second officer approached, took one look at him, then visibly straightened. Lila frowned. That was not how police reacted to a suspect. The first officer spoke into his radio, listened, then lowered his hand and removed his cap. Removed it. In the rain. Lila's stomach dropped. A minute later her intercom buzzed. "Miss Monroe," a male voice said. "Can you come downstairs, please?" "Did you arrest him?" she asked. There was a pause long enough to answer for him. "No, ma'am. We need to clarify something." Clarify. Her humiliation began before she even opened the apartment door. By the time she walked into the marble foyer in old sweatpants and mismatched socks, it was burning in her throat. The man stood near the stained glass entryway with rain still shining on his hair. Up close he was even more unsettling, not because he looked threatening, but because he looked composed in a way that suggested long practice at hiding strain. His face was sharply cut, his expression restrained, his eyes a piercing gray-blue that seemed to register everything and reveal almost nothing. The officer cleared his throat. "Miss Monroe, this is Elias Arden." The name landed a second before recognition did. Arden Global. Arden Hotels. Arden MedTech. Elias Arden, the youngest billionaire on half the business covers in the country and the most private man on any list of powerful people worth knowing. Lila had seen him on muted televisions in the hospital cafeteria and once on the cover of a magazine abandoned in the break room. On paper he was polished, ruthless, impossible. In front of her he looked tired. Deeply, privately tired. "I'm sorry," she said, because it was the only sentence her pride could still form. "That makes 2 of us," he replied quietly. No sarcasm. No cruel satisfaction. Somehow that made it worse. The officer explained that Elias owned the carriage house and part of the adjoining courtyard. He had been waiting for his driver. Lila stared at him. In the rain? It wasn't raining when I came outside, Elias said. And the flowers? The officers exchanged a quick look. Elias turned his gaze fully on her, and for one disorienting second the room seemed to narrow around it. The flowers were a mistake, he said. The note was mine. Lila folded her arms over herself. So you admit you've been watching me? I notice you, he said. That is not the same thing. The officers, sensing something far more complicated than a routine call, found an excuse to leave. The door shut behind them, and silence filled the foyer. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Lila should have walked away. Instead she stood rooted to the cold tile, staring at the man she had just reported to the police. Elias slipped one hand into his pocket, and for the first time she saw something under the control. Not arrogance. Not annoyance. Nerves. You were right to be careful, he said. But if you want the truth, Lila, I haven't been trying to get your attention for a few weeks. He held her gaze, and something old and unresolved flashed there with almost painful force. I've been trying to find you for 7 years. Lila slept badly and woke furious, which at least felt cleaner than confused. By 8 in the morning she was standing in line at a coffee shop on Madison Street, replaying the previous night with a level of self-recrimination normally reserved for medication errors and terrible haircut decisions. She had called the police on a billionaire neighbor. Worse, she had called the police on a billionaire neighbor who knew her first name, her work schedule, and apparently believed he had been searching for her for 7 years. Any way she framed it, the situation was absurd. By 10, after a 4-hour nap and 2 cups of coffee strong enough to strip paint, absurd had matured into suspicion. She crossed the courtyard determined to confront him in daylight, when shadows were honest and expensive men looked less cinematic. The carriage house door was already open. Inside, the place was all old brick, black steel, and quiet money. A housekeeper guided her toward a sunlit library where Elias stood by a wall of windows in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked less like a tabloid myth in daylight and more like a man who had forgotten to sleep. I was wondering when you'd come over, he said. I wasn't coming over. I was demanding answers. That sounds more like you. The words made her stop. You don't know me. Not well enough, he said. But I know enough to understand you don't like being managed, pitted, or interrupted before coffee. Lila stared at him, then at the mug on the table already waiting near the chair opposite his. Black coffee. 1 spoonful of sugar. Exactly how she took it. Cold unease slid down her spine. How do you know that? Elias did not sit. Because 7 years ago, in a hospital waiting room in Hartford, you stole my coffee, declared it undrinkable, and fixed it yourself. The room went still. Hartford. The old teaching hospital. Lila had done 1 semester there during her emergency nursing rotation when she was 22, overworked, sleep-deprived, and carrying enough student debt to make her chest hurt every time she opened her email. She remembered dozens of faces from that year, but mostly in fragments, relatives crying, children asleep across plastic chairs, men trying not to fall apart in front of reception desks. No, she said slowly. That can't be right. Elias watched her with infuriating steadiness. My younger sister had collapsed during a charity gala. Panic attack complicated by an undiagnosed heart condition. She was admitted for observation. Reporters were outside. My father was furious. My mother was handling optics. I was 29 and pretending I knew how to keep everyone else standing. His mouth tightened slightly. You found my sister hyperventilating in the family waiting room because no one had realized she'd slipped out of her bed. You sat with her. You made her count ceiling tiles while she cried. Then you walked me to the vending machine and told me rich men were terrible in emergencies because no one ever taught them how to hear the truth the first time. Lila felt memory stir at the edge of recognition. The hallway. The fluorescent light. A dark-haired man in an expensive suit looking wrecked but determined not to show it. A girl of maybe 16 clutching her hand. "You were the brother," she said softly. "You said your sister hated hospitals. She still does." Lila sat without meaning to. "I don't understand." "That was one night. It was the worst night of my life," Elias said. "You were the only person who talked to me like I was a human being instead of a headline." Lila looked away first. Because she did remember something now. Not his name, but his eyes. The restraint. The exhaustion. The way he had asked if his sister was frightened and meant it more than whether she was stable. "Even if I believe that," she said, "people don't spend 7 years looking for a stranger from a hospital corridor." Elias was silent for a beat too long. "I didn't spend 7 years doing only that. I built companies. Buried my father. Took over a board that wanted me ornamental. Lost friends I should have kept. But I remembered you." He came around the desk slowly, stopping far enough away not to crowd her. "You left before dawn. Your badge only said Elf Monroe. The hospital wouldn't give me your information. By the time I found out you had transferred programs, you were gone. So you investigated me." "Eventually, yes." He did not sugarcoat it. "Not then. Years later." Lila let out a disbelieving laugh. "That is not reassuring." "I know. Then why tell me at all?" For the first time, something like frustration crossed his face, but it seemed directed at himself. "Because last night you looked terrified, and I would rather have you angry with the truth than frightened by a lie." Before Lila could answer, her phone buzzed. Brent. Her ex-fiancé. She stared at the screen, stomach dropping. 3 missed calls already. A text followed. "Saw cops at your place. Told you this neighborhood wasn't safe. Want me to come by?" Elias saw her expression sharpen. "Is that him?" he asked. "That's none of your business. Has he been following you?" The question was too direct, too accurate. Lila slipped the phone into her pocket. "Why would you think that?" Elias said nothing for a moment, then reached for a folder on the table. He did not open it. He simply laid it between them. "Because my security team flagged the same vehicle outside your building 4 times in 12 days. Registered to Brent Lawson." Lila stared at the folder like it had grown teeth. "You had security tracking my life?" "I had security monitoring the property after someone tried to access your mailbox with a copied key." Her breath caught. "What?" Elias held her gaze. "I never intended to tell you this way. But yes, Lila. Someone else has been watching you too." Every instinct told Lila to leave, and every practical part of her knew she needed to stay long enough to see what was in the folder. She opened it with fingers that were steadier than she felt. Grainy stills. Time stamps. Brent's dark SUV parked across the street from her building. Brent near the side gate with his baseball cap pulled low. Brent at the corner deli on a morning he had texted from another state claiming he was on a sales trip. Her mouth went dry. "How long?" she asked. 3 weeks confirmed, Elias said. "Possibly longer." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because until last night, I was still deciding whether warning you would make me look more dangerous than the man actually causing the danger." The honesty of it was so maddening she almost laughed. Instead she snapped the folder shut and stood. "You should have told me immediately." "You're right. And you absolutely should not know enough about my life to make that decision in the first place." "Also true." Lila turned away before the force of her own conflicted reaction showed on her face. The problem with Elias Arden was not that he lied well. It was that he answered too plainly, leaving her with nothing comfortable to push against. By afternoon she was back at St. Vincent's, moving through the emergency department with her usual clipped efficiency while her mind ricocheted between chart updates, medication requests, and images of Brent outside her building. During her lunch break she stepped into the staff stairwell and called him. "Have you been near my apartment?" she asked without greeting. Brent exhaled theatrically. "Lila, seriously? You sound paranoid. Answer me." "I drove by once. I was worried about you. That neighborhood is full of weirdos." Her grip tightened around the phone. "Do not come near me again. You really think you can talk to me like that after everything I did for you?" The old reflex of dread slid coldly through her. There it was. The entitlement. The grievance dressed up as care. "Goodbye, Brent." She hung up before he could pivot into apology. That night, when her shift ended, Elias was waiting across the street beside a black sedan, not in the courtyard, not under her window, not anywhere that could be mistaken for lurking. Just visible enough to be found if she wanted him. Lila almost kept walking. Instead she stopped. "I'm not getting in the car," she said. "I didn't ask you to." He held out a paper cup. "Coffee. Bought, not stolen." She took it despite herself. "You're impossible. I've heard worse from better people." He fell into step beside her as she started down the block toward her apartment. The city was damp from earlier rain, street lamps reflected in dark puddles. "I spoke to the precinct," he said. "They're increasing patrols near the building." Lila gave him a sideways look. "You can just call a precinct and make that happen." "Not because I'm me," he said. "Because I gave them the footage." "That sounds like being you." Elias glanced at her, and for the first time the edge of a smile touched his mouth. It changed his entire face, made him younger and far more dangerous. "Probably." They reached the corner deli. Its owner waved at Lila through the glass. Elias opened the door for her without comment and let her order first. The ordinariness of it unsettled her more than any grand gesture could have. Outside, they stood beneath the awning while neon from the laundromat next door painted the sidewalk in shifting blue and pink. "Why didn't you just knock on my door?" Lila asked suddenly. "If you found me months ago, why all the flowers and watching from a distance and vague notes like a man auditioning to be the subject of a true crime documentary?" Elias looked out at the street. "Because I knew what it would sound like if I told you the truth. That I remembered the exact shade of your scrubs from 7 years ago. That I kept the paper cup sleeve where you wrote down the breathing count my sister needed. That every time I thought I had become the kind of man my father wanted, I remembered you telling me power meant nothing if people felt smaller around me." Lila stared. "I said that? You were very tired and extremely judgmental." She laughed before she could stop herself. The sound startled both of them. Elias looked at her then, really looked, as if her laughter was rarer than he had allowed himself to hope. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me," he said. "So I told myself distance was respectful. And then you sent roses." "Yes. That was stupid. Catastrophically." She sipped the coffee to hide the smile threatening at the corner of her mouth. It was exactly how she liked it. "Your sister," she said after a moment. "Is she okay?" "Ava's fine. Healthy. Infuriating. She runs our foundation and claims I'm emotionally illiterate." "Is she wrong?" "Increasingly difficult to prove." Lila shook her head, but a warmth she had no intention of encouraging settled low in her chest. They walked the final block in easy silence until headlights flared across the street. A black SUV slowed. Not Brent's. Worse. A photographer leaned halfway out the passenger window and snapped 3 rapid shots before the driver accelerated. Elias muttered something under his breath that sounded expensive and unfriendly. "Who was that?" Lila asked. His expression shut down with practiced speed. "Someone who should not be here." Her pulse quickened. "Elias." He looked at her, jaw tightening. My mother has been trying to announce my engagement for 6 months, he said. To a woman I have never once agreed to marry. Lila went still. And now there are pictures of you walking me home. Yes. You're telling me I called 911 on my neighbor, found out he was a billionaire, and 24 hours later I'm apparently in the middle of whatever rich people disaster this is? That appears to be the trajectory. She should have stepped back. Instead she heard herself ask, is she nice? Elias almost laughed. Which woman? The one your mother is trying to hand you like a merger. I have no idea, he said. I never stayed long enough to learn. By 9 the next morning, there were already 2 blurry entertainment blog posts speculating that the famously private Elias Arden had been seen in downtown Manhattan with an unknown brunette in medical scrubs. By noon, one outlet had identified Lila by name. By 2, her phone was vibrating every few minutes with messages from numbers she didn't recognize, including one from Brent that simply read, "So this is why you suddenly stopped answering." Lila turned her phone face down on the nurse's station and focused on triage. Broken wrist. High fever. Asthma flare. Human crises were mercifully concrete. Celebrity gossip was not. Near the end of her shift, the charge nurse pulled her aside with a sympathetic wince. "There's a man here asking for you," she said. Expensive suit, haunted expression. "So either it's your boyfriend or your tax auditor." Lila found Elias in the lobby standing with a bouquet of eucalyptus and white ranunculus that was significantly more restrained than the disastrous roses. "If those are an apology," she said, "you're getting better. Progress is all I can offer." He looked tired. More than tired. Bruised around the edges in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "May I have 5 minutes?" Against her better judgment, she nodded. They stepped outside into the sharp spring air. "My mother's office leaked the sighting," he said. "Not because she knows who you are. Because she wants leverage. If the press sees me with someone else, it pressures me to finalize the engagement she wants." Lila stared at him. That is a horrifying sentence. It improves only marginally with context. And what exactly am I in this scenario? Collateral damage? A decoy? A useful inconvenience? His eyes met hers immediately. None of those. Then what? A pause. Traffic hissed by on wet pavement. "The woman I have thought about for 7 years," he said. "The woman I should have approached honestly instead of cautiously and badly." Lila looked away before the rawness of that landed. "You don't know me now," she said. "You know a version of me from one hospital corridor and a handful of distant observations. Then let me know you now." The simplicity of it nearly undid her. She folded her arms hard across herself. "That is exactly the kind of line that works on other women." "Probably," he said. "I'm relieved to know it failed on you." She almost smiled. Almost. But the pressure of the day had already frayed her patience thin. "I don't have room for this, Elias. I work. I sleep when I can. I'm still digging myself out of debt from nursing school and from a man who convinced me love meant paying his bills while he got back on his feet. I do not have emotional availability for billionaire mothers, paparazzi, or men who watch my windows because they think destiny excuses terrible judgment." Something flickered across his face then. Hurt, quick and unguarded. But when he spoke, his voice stayed level. "You're right. Destiny excuses nothing." He handed her the flowers. "Keep these if you like them. Throw them away if you don't. I will handle the press." For 3 days, he did. The stories vanished as quickly as they had appeared. The building's front desk got new security procedures. Patrol cars drifted through the block more frequently. Brent stopped texting. Lila should have felt relieved. Instead she felt the absence of Elias like a room gone suddenly quiet after music ends. On the fourth night she came home late and found her apartment door slightly ajar. Every muscle in her body locked. Her keys slipped from numb fingers onto the hallway runner. Before she could think, a hand closed gently around her elbow. She almost screamed. Lila. Elias. She spun, breath tearing free. He was dressed in a charcoal coat, no tie, his face sharp with controlled alarm. "Don't go in," he said. "The alarm company called me when the building system was tripped." "Why would they call you?" she demanded, even as her eyes fixed on the thin line of darkness between her door and frame. "Because after the mailbox incident, I paid to upgrade the entire property's security network. Your superintendent signed off." She stared at him, then at the open door. "That's insane." "Probably." His hand left her elbow at once, as if he had remembered the line between help and intrusion and feared he had crossed it. "But right now, it's useful." The police arrived within minutes. This time no one removed a cap for Elias. This time the officers went straight inside with flashlights and hard voices. Lila stood in the hall shaking while Elias remained a careful step away, close enough to steady, far enough not to claim. 10 endless minutes later, an officer emerged carrying her old jewelry box and the shoebox where she kept tax records. "Whoever came in didn't take electronics," he said. "Looks personal." Lila's stomach turned over. "Brent." It had Brent written all over it. The officer asked if she had anyone who could stay with her. She almost said no out of habit. Then she looked at the wreckage visible beyond the doorway and the man waiting quietly beside the wall. Elias did not speak. Did not offer. Did not assume. He simply met her gaze and let her decide. The restraint of it felt more intimate than any dramatic promise could have. "I can't stay here tonight," she said finally. "No," Elias agreed softly. "You can't." She swallowed. "If I came across the courtyard," she said, hating how fragile her voice sounded, "would you make this more complicated than it already is?" Something changed in his expression then, something so careful it nearly hurt to witness. "No," he said. "I would make it safe." Elias's house at night was quieter than her apartment had ever been. Not emptier. Just quieter, as if the walls had been trained to hold secrets without repeating them. He led Lila upstairs to a guest suite overlooking the garden, set a glass of water on the nightstand, and stopped at the doorway. "There are locks on both sides," he said. "If you need anything, the house line reaches my office downstairs." He hesitated, then added, "No one comes up here without your permission. Not me, not staff, not security." Lila studied him in the soft amber light. "You thought of that in advance." "I think of many things in advance. That's part of the problem." The corner of his mouth moved faintly. "I'm aware." She should have slept. Instead she stood for long minutes at the window in borrowed silence, looking out over the courtyard where fear had first found her and wondering when exactly fear had stopped feeling like the most dangerous thing in her life. The answer, inconveniently, was somewhere between Elias saying her name in the foyer and Elias stepping back tonight every time instinct seemed to pull him forward. At 2 in the morning she found him in the kitchen making tea like a man who had no idea what normal insomniacs did. He was in a dark t-shirt, sleeves pushed up, reading glasses low on his nose over a stack of financial documents. The sight of the glasses was so unexpectedly human it robbed her of speech for half a second. He looked up. "I thought nurses were supposed to recommend sleep. I also recommend not reading quarterly reports after midnight, yet here we are." He set the kettle aside and reached for a second mug without asking. "Chamomile? You own chamomile?" "My sister claims I'm emotionally constipated and buys herbs accordingly." Lila laughed, soft but real. He slid the mug toward her. She sat across from him at the long oak table, hair loose around her shoulders, oversized borrowed sweatshirt swallowing her hands. The domesticity of it felt dangerous. Not flashy, not dramatic. Just dangerous in the way simple things often were. Tell me about your father, she said before she could reconsider. Elias was quiet for a moment. He believed love was a distraction for men with less to do. That sounds cheerful. He was not known for warmth. And your mother? She believes affection is best expressed through strategic introductions and favorable press coverage. Lila wrapped both hands around the mug. So when you say you've been in love with me for 7 years, what does that actually mean? Elias didn't answer immediately, and she was absurdly grateful for that. Easy answers would have felt rehearsed. It means, he said at last, that I measured other moments against the one where you sat on a plastic hospital chair at 3 in the morning with mascara under your eyes and told my terrified sister a bad night was not the same thing as a bad life. It means when people praised me for being decisive, I thought about how you were exhausted and still made more room for frightened people than anyone in my world ever had. It means I looked for you when I had no right to expect you wanted to be found, and when I finally did find you, I was afraid my wanting would make your life smaller. Lila looked at him across the steam rising between them. That's not a small thing to say. No, and it's also not enough on its own. I know. The honesty of it hit her harder than any polished seduction could have. You can't love an idea of me, she said quietly. I'm not the girl in the hallway anymore. Good, Elias said. I was hoping to meet the woman who survived becoming herself. The silence that followed was long and charged and impossible to name. Lila broke it by asking, did you really keep the coffee sleeve? Instead of answering, Elias opened the drawer beside him and took out a slim leather wallet. From it he removed a creased cardboard sleeve, carefully preserved. Across the front, in hurried blue ink, was her cramped handwriting. Breathe in 4. Hold 4. Out 6. Repeat until the fear gets bored. Lila stared at it, then at him. That is either deeply romantic or mildly alarming. I've been told the line between the two is where most of my problems begin. She should not have smiled. She did anyway. An hour later they were on the rooftop terrace because neither of them had managed sleep and the city below looked washed clean under the midnight sky. The air was cool. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed and faded. Lila stood beside the stone railing in borrowed socks while Elias draped a coat over her shoulders without touching her skin. You know what the worst part is? She asked. I'm listening. A tiny, deeply embarrassing part of me is flattered. Only a tiny part. She looked up at him. Don't ruin it. His gaze dropped to her mouth and stayed there one heartbeat too long. The moment stretched, delicate and electric. Lila felt it like a step taken in the dark before the floor had confirmed itself. Elias, she whispered. He lifted one hand, stopped before touching her face, and waited. The waiting undid her. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was permission. Lila closed the distance herself. The kiss was warm and careful at first, then not careful at all. It carried weeks of tension and 7 years of impossible timing and the sharp relief of wanting something she had promised herself not to want. When they finally drew apart, both of them were breathing harder. Elias rested his forehead briefly against hers. I should probably say something intelligent, he murmured. Don't, she said. You'll ruin it. Morning ruined it instead. Lila came downstairs to find 2 of Elias's attorneys in the library and a legal packet on the desk. What is this? She asked, dread already rising. Elias turned, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked almost guilty. Protective orders, he said. For Brent. Preliminary paperwork only. You thought you'd handle it. Her voice went cold. I thought I could make this easier. Without asking me. I was going to ask. After your lawyers drafted it. She set the packet down like it had contaminated her hands. The hurt on his face did not soften her. Not yet. You do not get to rescue me by replacing my choices with yours. Lila, no, she stepped back, pulse hard and furious. I kissed you. I did not hand you control. Lila left before breakfast settled, before guilt could dilute anger, before Elias could say something dangerous enough to sound reasonable. She crossed the courtyard with her spine locked straight and did not look back, though she felt him watching from somewhere behind the windows. Her apartment smelled wrong when she walked in, like dust disturbed by strangers. The police had finished their sweep, but disorder remained in small humiliating ways, a drawer left open, a scarf on the floor, one picture frame cracked at the corner. Violation rarely looked cinematic. Mostly it looked petty. Intimate. Mean. She spent the morning on the phone with her bank, her landlord, the precinct, and finally the hospital social worker who knew exactly which tone to use when someone was furious because fear had found a more acceptable disguise. By noon Lila had calmed enough to understand two things clearly. First, Brent had escalated. Second, Elias had been wrong to decide for her, but he had not been wrong about the danger. She drove to family court herself. No chauffeur. No dark sedan. No billionaire intermediary. She filed the paperwork in her own name and answered each question with a steadiness that made the clerk look at her twice. When Brent arrived outside the courthouse as if summoned by malice alone, Lila was ready for him. "So this is what we're doing now," he said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Running to rich men and cops because you can't handle a conversation." Lila faced him on the courthouse steps beneath a sky turning silver with afternoon rain. "No," she said. "This is me handling the conversation." Brent moved closer, voice dropping. "You think he cares about you? Men like that collect women." "Funny," Lila said. "Men like you mistake access for ownership." His jaw flexed. For a second the charm slipped entirely, revealing the small, hard thing beneath it. "You owe me." There it was. Always the ledger. Always the debt he invented so he could feel entitled to collect. "I owe myself better judgment," Lila said. "That's the only unpaid balance here." She walked away before he could answer, legs trembling only once she reached her car. That evening Ava Arden called. Lila nearly let it go to voicemail, then answered out of curiosity. Elias's sister sounded exactly like the sort of woman who had survived a frightened adolescence and come back funnier. "I'm not calling to manipulate you," Ava said immediately. "I'm calling because my brother is being unbearable in silence, and I need to know whether to punch him emotionally or physically." Against all reason, Lila laughed. "That depends. Did he tell you what happened?" "He told me he made a choice for you because he was afraid. Which, to be clear, is our family's least attractive inherited trait." Ava's voice softened. "For what it's worth, he has loved you in the most inconvenient way possible. But inconvenient love is still not a free pass. If you want him miserable a little longer, I support women's rights and women's wrongs." Lila sat on her couch, staring at the rain trailing down the window. Did he really keep that coffee sleeve all these years? "In a fireproof drawer," Ava said. "Which I only mention because blackmail is healthy between siblings." Lila closed her eyes. "That is deranged." "You're not wrong." There was a pause. "But he also funded the patient family quiet room at Hartford after that night because you told him waiting rooms should feel less cruel. He didn't name it after himself. He barely mentioned it. He just did it." Lila swallowed. She had not known that. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to have the whole picture. He can be controlling when he's scared. He learned that from our parents. The difference is he hates that about himself. And he will listen if someone he loves tells him no. Someone he loves." The phrase stayed with Lila long after the call ended. 2 nights later she attended a hospital fundraising gala because her supervisor had guilt half the staff into showing up, and because life enjoyed a sense of humor. The gala was at the Arden Hotel. Lila wore a black dress borrowed from a friend and heels she regretted within 20 minutes. She planned to donate her smile, avoid photographers, and leave early. Instead she stepped into the ballroom and saw Elias at the far end of the room beneath a chandelier blaze of light, speaking to board members with that cool, impossible composure the public knew. His mother stood beside him in silver silk, elegant as a threat. Across from them was a woman in sapphire satin, presumably the almost fiancée. Lila should have looked away. She couldn't. As if feeling the pull of her gaze, Elias turned. The entire room seemed to fall out of focus around the precision of that moment. He excused himself immediately and crossed toward her with unmistakable intent. His mother's expression tightened. The woman in sapphire looked curious rather than possessive. "You came," he said. "It's a fundraiser," Lila replied. "For children, not billionaires." Something like relief moved through him. "You look careful," she warned. "I was going to say furious in a beautiful way, but I can revise." She almost smiled. "That would be wise." He lowered his voice. "I was wrong. No defense. No hedging. Just that." The directness of it struck deeper than apology speeches usually did. "Yes," Lila said. "You were. I know." He glanced toward the ballroom entrance, where Brent had just appeared on the guest list line arguing with security. Elias's expression went flat as winter glass. He should not be here. Lila followed his gaze, heart kicking. Brent, in a cheap dark suit and a bad temper, was shoving his way past the host stand. "Then maybe," she said quietly, "we stop letting other people decide the shape of this story." Brent made it 4 steps into the ballroom before security intercepted him. That should have ended it. It didn't. He raised his voice immediately, the way men did when humiliation was their native language and volume felt like power. Heads turned. Conversations thinned. Camera phones lifted like a flock responding to instinct. "Ask her." Brent shouted, pointing at Lila across the marble floor. "Ask your billionaire prince where he found her. He's been stalking her for months." A wave of whispers moved through the room. Elias went still beside Lila, all that controlled force collapsing inward into something colder. His mother took one sharp breath, not in concern, but in calculation. Lila felt the moment stretching toward disaster, felt the room preparing to turn her into spectacle, victim, scandal, maybe opportunist depending on which table got the story first. Then the old hospital instinct clicked in. Focus. Assess. Act. She stepped forward before Elias could. "You want the truth," she called, voice carrying farther than she expected. The room quieted. Brent smiled too quickly, confident that attention meant advantage. Lila reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. "Good," she said. "Because I recorded our conversation outside the courthouse yesterday." Brent's smile vanished. She hit play. His voice spilled cleanly through the ballroom speakers because she had, after years of dealing with emergencies, long ago learned to carry a portable amplifier in her work bag for patient education presentations. She had transferred the file before entering. Brent's recorded words cut through the chandelier light like wire. "You think he cares about you? Men like that collect women. You owe me." The final phrase echoed. A soft, ugly murmur moved through the room. Brent lunged forward. Security caught him. "That's edited," he snapped. "That's taken out of context." "Then perhaps," Elias said, speaking for the first time, "you would like the full footage submitted with the restraining order." His tone was quiet. That made it lethal. Brent blanched. For the first time all evening, Elias's mother looked uncertain. Not morally uncertain. Strategically. Lila hated that she could now tell the difference. "Remove him," Elias said. Security did. Brent shouted threats until the doors closed and the ballroom swallowed him whole. Silence followed, thick and bright and electric. Lila became aware of 200 strangers watching her breathe. Then Ava appeared from nowhere at her side with a glass of champagne. She clearly had no intention of letting Lila refuse. For the record, Ava murmured, "I love you a little." Lila let out a shaky laugh. The room slowly resumed motion, though every glance now carried a sharpened edge of curiosity. Elias turned to her. "Walk with me?" he asked. She nodded. They moved through a side corridor into the hotel conservatory, where night pressed against tall windows and the city beyond glittered like it had no idea human beings were making disastrous emotional choices inside it. For a long moment neither spoke. Finally Lila said, "I didn't come here planning to defend you. I know. I came because I was angry. Also fair." She looked at him. "I'm still angry. I assumed as much. But I'm also done pretending. The problem is that you care." His eyes searched hers with painful restraint. "Then what is the problem?" Lila exhaled slowly. "The problem is that you're used to being able to move mountains with one phone call. And I'm used to surviving people who thought helping me meant taking over. Those things together are a bad combination unless we're both willing to learn a different language." Elias stood very still. "I can learn." "You'll have to." "I will." She believed he meant it. Not because billionaires made good promises. Usually they made polished ones. But Elias sounded like a man standing at the edge of something he wanted badly enough to let it change him. "There's one more thing," he said. "My board meets tomorrow. They intend to use tonight to argue I've become a liability." Lila frowned. "Because of me?" "Because I refuse to announce an engagement they want for market confidence. Because my mother keeps confusing business strategy with emotional extortion. Because tonight embarrassed people who prefer quiet scandals to public truth." She crossed her arms. "And what are you going to do?" He looked out at the city. "I was planning to step down." Lila's breath caught. "What?" "I built the company. I can walk away from it." "Because of me?" "Because I'm tired," he said. "And because if power requires me to let people like Brent dictate the terms of my life, it isn't power." The words landed harder than she expected. Lila moved closer. "Do not make me another decision you take on alone," she said quietly. Elias turned. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking you to stop confusing sacrifice with partnership." For the first time that night, something softer than fatigue touched his face. That sounded very much like the woman from the hospital corridor. She got older and meaner. "Thank God." He lifted a hand, then stopped, waiting as always for permission he had once been too afraid to seek and more recently too afraid to lose. Lila stepped into him first. The kiss was not cautious this time. It was earned. It tasted like adrenaline, forgiveness not yet completed, and the terrifying beginning of trust. When they parted, Elias rested his forehead briefly against hers. "For the record," he murmured, "I have been in love with you for 7 years." Lila's pulse stumbled. "For the record," she whispered back, "that is still mildly alarming." He laughed then, fully and without restraint, and the sound moved through her like light through dark water. The next morning the board meeting ran 4 hours. Lila spent 2 of them in the hospital and 2 in a waiting room that felt absurdly full circle. When Elias finally emerged from the elevator into Arden Global's private lobby, tie loosened, eyes shadowed, she stood. "Well?" she asked. He stared at her like he hadn't dared expect she would be there. "I didn't step down," he said. "Good. I dissolved the arranged merger, replaced 3 board members, and informed my mother that if she leaks your name again, she will learn how little sentiment I inherited from my father." Lila blinked. "That sounds expensive." "Very." He came closer. "Was I worth waiting 7 years for?" she asked before she could stop herself. Elias looked at her with a steadiness that made every answer she had ever feared feel suddenly childish. "You were worth learning how," he said. The restraining order was granted 2 weeks later. Brent violated it once with a drunk voicemail that was less threatening than pathetic, and after that even he seemed to understand the game had changed. Fear did not vanish overnight, but it stopped living in Lila's muscles quite so permanently. She returned to sleeping through most nights. She stopped checking the courtyard before unlocking her own door. She began, against every prediction her former self would have made, having dinner with Elias 3 times a week and arguing with him about everything from hospital funding to whether mint belonged in iced tea. He lost that argument consistently and with improving grace. Summer arrived by slow degrees. The courtyard filled with light. The roses Elias sent now came only when asked, which Lila considered character growth of the highest order. Sometimes he walked her home from late shifts and stopped at the building entrance instead of assuming invitation. Sometimes she invited him up. Sometimes she crossed to the carriage house without knocking because she had begun to understand the difference between being expected and being welcome. The distinction mattered. He seemed to know that instinctively now, as if loving her had finally taught him what devotion looked like without ownership. One hot July evening, Lila came home to find Ava sitting on her front stoop eating gelato directly from the container. "Should I be worried?" Lila asked. "Probably, but not about me." Ava handed her a spoon. "My brother is attempting romance with planning documents, and I'm here to make sure no one dies of second-hand earnestness." Lila sat beside her, laughing despite herself. "That bad?" He made a spreadsheet. "Oh no." Ava looked offended. "That was my response too." She sobered after a moment. "He's terrified, you know." "Of what?" "Of getting it wrong with you." "Which is healthy." "New." "Slightly hilarious." Lila leaned back against the warm brick. Across the courtyard, lights glowed in Elias's study. "He already got it wrong," she said. "More than once." "And?" Lila watched his silhouette move behind the window, familiar now in a way that still occasionally startled her. "And he came back willing to listen." Ava smiled. "That's the whole trick." In August, Lila's supervisor called her into the office and announced that a nurse-led outreach clinic grant she had applied for 6 months earlier had finally been approved. Lila laughed in stunned disbelief, then cried in the supply closet for 5 private minutes because apparently that was who success had turned her into. When she told Elias that night over takeout on his terrace, he looked almost as proud as she felt. "Say the word," he began, "and I can have a team look at locations, build out, logistics." Lila raised one eyebrow. He stopped instantly and held up both hands. "You're right. I hate when you make me learn in real time." She smiled. "You can help if I ask." "That sounds fair and terrible." "Life is hard. Cruel, really." He kissed her knuckles in mock tragedy, and the simple tenderness of it nearly undid her. The clinic opened in October in a converted storefront 3 blocks from St. Vincent's. Lila named it Harbor House because she liked the idea of healing sounding like arrival instead of endurance. Elias donated anonymously until she caught him and made him stop hiding behind shell foundations. His eventual contribution came with no naming rights, no press release, and no attempt to steer decisions. That, more than the size of it, was how she knew he had changed. Or maybe not changed. Maybe become more fully himself than the world had previously allowed. The first cold night of November arrived with a clean wind and a silver moon over the courtyard. Lila had just locked up Harbor House after a 14-hour day when her phone buzzed with a message from Elias. "Balcony." She looked up. He was standing under the same amber security light where she had first mistaken him for a threat, coat open, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable from this distance. Her heart kicked once, hard. She crossed the courtyard slowly, almost smiling at the symmetry of it. "If you're about to say something dramatic under this lamp," she called, "I want it noted that the setting is suspiciously on theme." "I considered candles," he said. "Then I remembered your views on fire hazards." "Character growth." He stepped closer. The night air smelled like cold stone and distant rain. For a moment he just looked at her, and she knew before he spoke that whatever came next had been carried carefully. "The first time I saw you," he said, "you were wearing terrible hospital shoes and telling my sister fear got bored if you refused to entertain it." Lila smiled softly. "I stand by that. The second time I saw you, years later, you were carrying groceries up these steps and trying to answer a phone call with your shoulder while digging for your keys. I nearly introduced myself then." "Why didn't you?" "Because I wanted to deserve the chance." Her throat tightened. He took a small velvet box from his coat pocket, but he did not open it yet. "Lila Monroe, you were never some fantasy I built from one night. You became the standard by which I measured whether I was living like a man or merely performing as one. You challenged me before you knew my name. You challenge me still. You make rooms feel more honest. You make power feel useful only if it protects tenderness. I loved you badly from a distance. I would like to love you better up close, for the rest of my life, if you'll let me." Then he opened the box. Inside, the ring was elegant and simple, an old oval diamond set in warm gold that looked less like display and more like inheritance. "Before you panic," he added, voice gentler now, "this is not ownership, not rescue, not a decision made over your head. This is a question. One I will survive if the answer is no. But I hope very much it isn't." Lila felt tears gather before she could stop them. "You planned that line," she accused softly. "For weeks," he admitted. She laughed through the tears. "Ava helped, didn't she?" Aggressively. The courtyard around them seemed to hold its breath. The same light. The same stone. The same man she had once feared because she did not yet understand what patient love looked like when it had learned humility. Lila stepped forward until only inches remained between them. "When I called 911, she said, I thought I was asking for protection from the wrong man." Elias said nothing. He was watching her with that terrifying steadiness, as if the world had narrowed to one answer. She touched his face with cold fingers and smiled. "Yes," she whispered. "But only if you promise never to send in signed flowers again." Relief and joy broke across his face so swiftly it was almost boyish. "Done." He slid the ring onto her finger with reverence rather than triumph. Then she kissed him under the amber light while the city moved around them, indifferent and enormous and suddenly full of grace. Much later, wrapped in his coat on the carriage house balcony, Lila looked down into the courtyard and laughed softly. "What?" Elias asked. She held up her left hand so the ring caught the light. "I was just thinking," she said, leaning into him, "this has to be the strangest happy ending anyone ever got from a 911 call." Elias kissed her temple. "Not an ending," he said. "A correction." And beneath the same watchful sky where fear had once stood motionless and unnamed, Lila believed him.